The first bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 2744. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File number 2744, number 2 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to commerce, the unofficial engrossment.
I recognize the member from Anoka, the author of the bill, Representative Stevenson, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members.
Please take your conversations off the House floor. Even Representative Erdahl, please take your conversations.
Called out.
Please take your conversations off the House floor. Representative Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Erdahl. And thank you, members, for allowing me to bring before you the Commerce Budget Bill. We had a great committee this year, and I'm really proud of the work product that we're bringing before you. And I want to thank the members, both the DFL and the Republican members of the committee, for the great work we did in committee and the good, sometimes robust, but always collegial discussions that we had in committee, particularly the lead on the committee, Representative O'Driscoll, who, we had a very good working relationship that I very, very much appreciate, and I really do. We also had phenomenal staff on this committee that worked very hard, our amazing nonpartisan staff, House Research, Lori Pompu, and our House Fiscal, Ashley Eng. We had great researchers on both the DFL and the Republican side, and Eric Anderson, Casey Peterson, and then, of course, our Committee Legislative Assistant, Jack Dockendorf, and our Committee Administrator, Simon Brown, without whom I would be not figuratively, but literally lost, I'm sure. I would not probably have made it to the chamber today. I would be off wandering in the wilderness. So thank you for that. I just want to highlight a couple of provisions in the bill. I think we're going to have a good discussion about some other provisions in the amendments discussion, so I'm going to try and stick to the ones that aren't going to be big amendments with a few exceptions. Number one, this bill is so critical to tackling the problem of soaring prescription drug prices that so many of us hear from our constituents every day. Members, no one should have to choose between paying the mortgage and paying for their prescription drugs. We need to fix that, and this bill takes some important steps in banning price gouging and creating a prescription drug affordability board, what will be the strongest prescription drug affordability board in the country when we pass this bill. This bill also tackles that problem by including Chair Howard's excellent bill to cap the costs of things like EpiPens and insulin and other chronic conditions that are bankrupting people with the medication that they need to live. We've seen in other places around the country an assault on people's health care, including some tragic federal court decisions targeting preventive health care, things that save lives, cancer screenings, PrEP and PEP. This bill ensures that Minnesotans will have access to those life-saving treatments without the need for cost sharing. That's important. We are going to get across the finish line this year, Chair Cagle's great bill, to put some teeth into our rules on mental health parity and substance use disorder parity. Those protections in law that we have that say that there has to be parity on those treatments are useless if they're not enforced. And so we're going to create a new office to tackle that and to make sure we're enforcing the law. We're going to end the terrible and predatory practice of payday lending in Minnesota, which has been a long time battle in this state. We're going to finish the work we started with the Student Borrowers Bill of Rights by creating a student loan advocate to stand up for students and make sure that they're not being taken advantage of. We're going to tackle the problem, one of the defining problems of our time, in my view, which is the experiment that is being run by big technology companies on our children for profit in the form of social media by passing a nation-leading piece of legislation authored by Representative Bonner called the Age Appropriate Design Act. That is a critical piece of legislation that I'm really proud to bring to the floor today, and thank you, Representative Bonner, for your hard work on that. So thank you, members, for the discussion today, and I look forward to it as we proceed.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Stevenson moves to amend Senate File number 2744, the unofficial engrossment. The amendment is coded A9.
Representative Stevenson, to your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The A9 amendment makes a couple of technical changes and also reflects some ongoing discussions between the insurance industry and the department in the storm, in the resilient homes language. I'd ask for member support.
Any discussion on the Stevenson amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Fisher moves to amend Senate File Number 2744, the unofficial engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A8.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I offer the A8 amendment. This is an amendment to address the digital right to repair part of the Commerce Bill. And this is a collaboration of people who are experts in cybersecurity. One of the things that people have mentioned as concerns about as you address digital right to repair, is there any issues around cybersecurity? And I want to first start off by saying that in 2021, the FTC made a report to Congress where they had explicitly asked manufacturers to provide evidence that authorized repairs were of higher quality or employed superior cybersecurity than independent repair. At that time, manufacturers were unable to provide any such evidence to the FTC, and the Commission concluded there was no empirical data that supports claims that authorized repair was more safer or higher quality than independent repair. However, in the interest of wanting to work across the lines to make sure that we have a very good bill here and being sensitive to things to give people comfort language, we decided we'd address cybersecurity in here. And in terms of bringing together the definition of cybersecurity, we realized there was no current definition in state statute. And so one of the things that we did is we contacted with national experts on cybersecurity and also with our own Minute cybersecurity experts to try to come up with a definition that they felt was very good to address cybersecurity, because this is the first time we're putting anything into state statute on it. And then the second part of it is some comfort language to help define a little bit more, is that the parts and tools and documentation that are needed for a right to repair so that people can repair their equipment out there does not have to be expressed if it was released if it would compromise cybersecurity. And with that, I will ask for a green vote.
There is an amendment to the amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
O'Driscoll moves to amend the Fisher amendment to Senate File Number 2744, the unofficial engrossment as amended. The amendment to the amendment is coded A19.
The member from Stearns, Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. And Representative Fisher, thank you for your attempts to try to clarify the cybersecurity issues. As many in this chamber have worked on cyber issues, Representative Bonner has, Representative Nash has, and others, we know that cybersecurity is an extremely sensitive issue. We also know that many of the devices that we have, our phones, our computers, other handheld devices, not only can be wirelessly connected now via Wi-Fi and other technologies. If you have a device that you bring into a place to have it repaired, your data, your information could be co-opted. We've all heard of the Bluetooth incidences that can happen. This is simply a way to be able to try to protect not only the company and the customer, but to protect all of us from cybersecurity-related breaches. And so what the A19 amendment does, it simply adds to Representative Fisher's language the phrase, unless the original equipment manufacturer determines that it creates a cyber risk. And who better than the manufacturer and the producer of the device to provide us that information as to whether or not that device could have the capability of compromising cybersecurity. And so members, with that, I ask for a yes vote on the A19 amendment to the underlying A8 amendment.
Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Driscoll, thank you for offering the amendment. This is an area that you're addressing on my amendment that I'm still working with people on. I would ask for a no vote on this. First of all, I will say this is an area that we continue to work on with the wording. I've been working with different people, and I think we're getting very close on it. The reason I would ask for this phrase to be rejected, this amendment, is because there's some things in here that we don't have definitions on. Example, cybersecurity risk. We don't have that defined. Another issue that I'm concerned about is while there's some very good people I've been working with on having great intentions and are working in an honest way to bring things together to address this issue, there's some that manufacturers out there that are not always this honorable. And what I mean by that is they could define that a part is no longer going to be made available because they could claim it has a cybersecurity risk when it doesn't. So there needs to be some work in that area to try to figure out how do we get at that part of the issue. And when I say that is I remember that some of the original discussions when we had the iPhones, and we started working on this years ago, you could not get access from independent from our iPhones. And people said, oh, it's a security risk. And now you've got the independents that are able to get it. So I think that, first of all, by having these conversations, that gets the manufacturers to continue working on it. And at the same time, it gives us a chance to say, let's make sure we do this the right way. So I understand the intent. We'll continue working on it, but would ask for a red vote.
Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Fisher and members. Representative Fisher, I would ask for a yes vote, and I appreciate your willingness to continue to work on this. This will just, if we add this to the bill, it will remind the conferees when they get to conference committee how important this fact is and act as a reminder. So if nothing else, it's a placeholder that we need to address this language. So again, members, I strongly encourage a yes vote on the A19 amendment to the A18 amendment.
Any further discussion on the amendment to the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. On the underlying Fisher amendment, any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Nash moves to amend Senate File Number 2744, the unofficial engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A4.
The member from Carver, Representative Nash, to your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The A4 removes the language on the right to repair from the bill, and there's a reason why. At your desk, you've gotten a letter that I had sent out from Cisco, IBM, and Hewlett-Packard, or HP Enterprise. Members, I used to work in the enterprise level in IT, and I've spoken to several of the people in our IT caucus here in the House. Each of them have concerns. I talked with Representative Neuer last night, who has concerns, and I would like very much to allow folks who want to repair these things to be able to, but from an enterprise technology perspective, the tools and different things that have to be made available to people in order to repair this compromises not just cybersecurity, but also physical attack, as I've said in Ways and Means today. It's a work in progress, and Representative Fisher, you and I have spoken about this, as has Chair Stevenson and I. But I said in Ways and Means today, if you remember back to the Andy Griffith show in Mayberry, you had Emmett Clark, the guy that was in Mayberry that would fix your toaster or your blender or your vacuum cleaner. That's great. And I think that there are some electronic devices that can be fixed by somebody, but the training and certification that goes into this, super important. Because if you have somebody come to fix a piece of enterprise tech and they are not properly trained, you're now just going to have a large pile of silicon chips. And what further happens is with the keys and the roadmap and all the different things that will be published, is you make yourself more susceptible to compromise. So would Chair Stevenson yield to a question?
He will yield. Representative Nash.
So Chair Stevenson, we just talked about this, and you asked me to ask you to yield to a question. My ask of you before I withdraw this amendment is, will you work to make sure that folks like IBM, Cisco, Hewlett-Packard, major machine manufacturers feel comfortable with this before you let this bill out of conference?
Representative Stevenson.
Madam Speaker, Representative Nash, appreciate the question and the conversation. We are headed to conference. This is an issue that we still need to work on, and I will work with the stakeholders to try and address as many concerns as I possibly can.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And members, this is not me trying to blow up the right to repair. There are legitimate concerns that are shared by people on your side of the aisle as well. This is not a toaster. This is something that's infinitely more important than that could cause compromise for schools, the state of Minnesota, and many others. But with the chair's assurances that this will be continuing to work on, I would withdraw the A4.
Representative Nash withdraws the A4 amendment. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Perryman moves to amend Senate File Number 2744, the unofficial engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A15.
The member from Stearns, Representative Perryman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and what an appropriate time for me to back up Representative Nash. And first of all, I'd like to thank all of you members today, because you're going to support my amendment just by bringing what we can't bring in as a speaker or a presenter, props. When you hear my amendment, you all have props on your desk that are going to support this amendment. Just listen, please listen, because you're going to think this is, wow, what a great amendment. It affects you right now. So with that said, thank you for bringing your cell phones and your devices, because that is what I'm going to talk about today with my amendment. What would you do without technology? It touches your friends and families. It helps you stay in touch with your friends and families. And it helps you to know what's working and what's not working and what's going on the house floor. Think of how you feel when you can't find your phone. Just think of that. Think of when you don't know where your phone's at and you can't even like buzz something to find your phone. And when your phone doesn't work, how irritated are you when the phone doesn't work? And devices are used, right, for tools for everyday, normal Minnesotans, pretty much. I'm looking at all of you right now on your devices and cell phones. So please, take a listen to this amendment, because I think you're going to agree it is a great fit to Representative Stevens' bill. So with that said, and in mind, my amendment would fill a consumer protection gap in the bill by adding a consumer digital repair rights, a consumer digital repair rights disclosure, which would be a requirement for independent repair providers covered by this section. It includes disclosure to consumers of important information, such as whether the repair provider is authorized, the potential impact on the product warranty, whether the technician working on the device is trained, certified, and whether the parts are not from the original manufacturer, as well as the anticipated costs of the repair. Full disclosure. Probably the most important part of this amendment, though, is that consumers will be assured that their personal data on the device will not be disclosed, and any customer data needed for the repair will be deleted. So keep that in mind, the Privacy Act. We will ensure that this amendment has the consumer in mind, This information that consumers need and should be required for consumers to know when turning their device over to a provider for repair. And I'm just going to use me for an example. We have individuals that have come in with their cell phone, and they're telling my device, certified device repairers, I need my information off of here. I can't get my phone on. They tell me information's in the cloud. What the heck does that mean? And yada, yada, yada. And so technician takes it in and tells them right up front. And we have signatures on papers and everything to tell them what they're going to do and tell them what the cost would be, and also tell them that if we can't fix it or if we break it, we will replace the cell phone. So all that set up, they crack the phone opens, and there's screws missing, and there's a burnt battery in there, and the device repair person goes, wow. So those are kind of the issues we'll get, but we're always upfront and transparent with the consumer, telling them this could happen. And we also have forms that they sign that say, our Privacy Act, no one will get their information. Even if it's in the cloud, it's still out there on the phone. So we do a lot of transfers as well of information for these individuals that do not know what the cloud is about, where information's stored. We get a lot of individuals coming in saying, can you transfer my pictures over to this new phone? I don't know how to get it going. I could go on forever and ever with the things that do come into our business. So in my business, we are the ones who help you when your phone, iPad, or computer doesn't work. You are frantic and frustrated. You don't want to give up your item, actually. A lot of individuals will come in and you got to take it for 45 minutes. I'll just sit here and watch you while you do repair it. Those devices are so personal to everyone that it's like giving up I don't know, something very personal that you never want to give up. My family owns a Batteries Plus franchise. You probably all know that by now by some of my speeches. And we are an authorized repair provider for Samsung and in the process for Apple right now. We have other companies that we are certified for, but they're not as big players as Samsung and Apple. And why are we certified? Because my corporation, my franchise, insists on it. I cannot be a Batteries Plus bulbs store without sending my people to Milwaukee for a week to learn how to do this. I buy libraries worth of instructional videos, and these guys, I put a lot of money into it, but it's really worth it because we are the preferred individual. I'll say it out loud. We're the preferred individual to repair cell phones and iPads in St. Cloud, and we get a lot of accolades. It's because we do it right, and they trust the plus. No pun intended there. To provide authorized repair, we go through, as I said, significant training and heavy requirements we must follow, or there are consequences. I could lose my store if I do break the consequences that we are under contract. And as I said, it's costly, and it costs some money, but to me, it has been worth it. We also know, because of the money we spend, we also know that we are providing the best possible repair services to our customer. Our customer is number one, whether it's selling or fixing. Most of our customers are unfamiliar with the process and consequences of technology repair. I gave you some examples earlier. The purpose of A15 amendment would empower consumers of electric equipment to effectively advocate for themselves. I want to repeat that. It would empower consumers so their electric equipment and they can effectively advocate for themselves, as well as ensure they understand the repair process for their devices and that the data on their devices is protected. So a lot of transparency and a lot of disclosure right up front. So with that said, I am a proud device repair person. My story is, I have to say, I went through training myself. All the owners have to go through training themselves. I don't try to touch it, but I know enough of where we're going. So with that said, look at your phones like you all are. Look on your devices. Remember everything I just said, because you're going to need this disclosure soon, and I'm going to ask for a roll call. Speaker?
Representative Perryman requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Further discussion to the Perryman amendment. Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Perryman, for bringing this forward. I really appreciate your interest in making sure that we have good consumer rights protection. And as I've taken a look at this, I see some really good things in here. It feels a little narrow, and I can see some things where it could be a little bit broader. As I see independent repair provider, in consumer protection, would like to see all repair providers covered by that. And also, I'd love to hear from consumer protection rights groups. I know that we've worked with some of those in the past. I'd like to make sure that we get their input in the process. So I think this is something that sounds like more of a robust bill that we should come back with next session. And I'd like to say I'd be willing to work with you to bring that bill back and also involve some of the consumer rights groups to make sure that we're getting this done right. So thank you for bringing it forward. Want to say we need more work on it. Would ask for a red vote for now.
Any further discussion on the Perryman amendment? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Will the clerk please call the name of the member who's participating remotely?
Richardson.
Richardson votes no.
Richardson. Louder.
Say it a little louder.
Richardson votes no.
Richardson votes no.
The clerk will close the roll.
Okay.
There being 58 ayes and 71 noes, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
O'Driscoll moves to amend Senate File Number 2744, the unofficial engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A10.
The member from Stearns, Representative O'Driscoll, to the A10 amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. The A10 amendment addresses a provision that talks about requiring health insurance companies to, when determining premiums and costs, to calculate the costs and project those into the future in their actuarial projections of costs of premiums, what would happen by adding mandatory coverages here in the state of Minnesota. Thankfully, last year, this body passed and this legislature passed a review process to determine what the mandates might be going forward in insurance. And the part that's really kind of the sticky part on this is that it asks for a 10-year projection as to what the insurance companies feel costs would be to them and to premiums and to insureds as a result of a particular mandate. Having worked in the insurance industry and worked in many of Minnesota's various regulated industries, I can tell you, you will not find an actuary who will put their name on the bottom line and say that something is good for 10 years, 5 years, 7 years. In the insurance business, you're lucky to get 1 or 2 years. It's one of the reasons why we had the reinsurance program, was to be able to give actuaries a little bit more of a balance to be able to make those kinds of determinations. With this particular amendment, the Department of Commerce, I understand, is just going to collect the information. They're not going to be doing anything with the information. And I'm just wondering why we're collecting information and increasing costs on the insurance companies, which get passed on in premiums to folks. Wouldn't that money be better off used to provide reimbursement or to pay for care for individuals than for bureaucratic requests by government when they're not going to be worth the paper that they're written on? So, Madam Speaker, I would encourage folks to vote yes on this. But before we do that, I suspect that the bill author may want to weigh in on this. But before he does, Representative Stevenson, my question to you is, would it be easier for you in conference committee if we adopted this to remember that this needs work, or we'd be jotting down some notes and I can withdraw this amendment so we don't need to take it up today? Which do you think is most preferable?
Representative Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Driscoll, that is a really tough question to ask me if I want you to withdraw an amendment to my bill. No, I appreciate the conversation. I just want to acknowledge the good work, the good bipartisan work that's been going on around these mandate benefit review processes that have been largely retrospective. So far, this is an effort to try and be a little bit, continue the conversation after the mandate is adopted. I do think that this provision merits further examination for some of the reasons that Representative O'Driscoll talked about. So I commit to continuing to work on that and having that discussion in conference. I do think withdrawing it would be my preference.
Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Chair Stevenson. In light of the working relationship that we have had on the committee and the impending conference committee on here, I will withdraw the amendment, but we are not withdrawing the concept or idea for discussion. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Representative O'Driscoll withdraws the A10 amendment. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Farr moves to amend Senate File Number 2744, the unofficial engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A12.
The member from LeSueur, Representative Farr.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The language as it's written in the bill now singles out less than 10% of our state chartered banks and credit unions, while their nationally chartered counterparts are not required to do these surveys, thus creating a disadvantage for our state chartered institutions. And so the A12 would keep our financial institutions of a similar size on an even playing field by making this language effective once nationally chartered banks and federally chartered credit unions of the same size are required to submit climate risk surveys. The federal banking agencies have issued proposed climate guidance and are currently reviewing feedback, actually including stakeholder input. And Minnesota should allow them the time to finalize their rules, and then we can apply them equitably. Would be the correct way to implement this legislation. At a meeting this winter with stakeholders, we learned that the Department of Commerce didn't come up with this idea. We don't know exactly what this risk survey is going to look like, nor do we know what we're going to do with it. And like everyone, financial institutions would appreciate knowing the regulations they must follow and have the time to prepare to comply. This language, as written, gives no guidance or limitations as to what the survey would or could entail, how burdensome it might be to our state chartered institutions, and again, includes no stakeholder input. There's no way to estimate what new staffing needs will be required or costs that may be incurred. Minnesota would be the only state in the country to have adopted this and asking its financial institutions to complete a climate risk survey. So with that, Madam Speaker, I ask for a roll call.
Representative Farr requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Discussion on the Farr amendment. The member from Hennepin, Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Farr. I'm going to ask for a no vote on this. Climate change is impacting now and will impact all aspects of society. The underlying language is about putting in place a process to evaluate the climate risk of institutions critical to our economy here in Minnesota. The amendment would basically mean that we never do anything in Minnesota because national banks are at a different scale than Minnesota chartered banks. The underlying language is not about creating a process that mimics what national banks have to go through, but to put in place something that's appropriate for Minnesota, that's forward-looking, and protects our financial system from stresses due to climate change. The insurance industry already goes through a similar process.
The member from Stearns, Representative O'Driscoll.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And members, I want to put a little bit more background on this. When this particular bill came to the Commerce Committee, Commerce didn't even know really that it was coming, meaning that they didn't ask for it. It was a bill that was introduced by a member. And right now, the provision that Representative Farr was talking about, applying to federally chartered banks of $100 billion or more in assets. This bill and this provision says $1 billion worth of assets. And so in committee, I started asking the question, well, who does this apply to? And how does this work? And it was like, well, we just think it's good information. And Commerce, when I asked them, what are we going to do with this information? Once again, it was, well, if we have to get the information, we'll collect it. I said, are you going to be putting a report together? Well, no. What are you going to do with it? We're just going to have it. I said, how are you going to be able to get that information to the public if they're inquiring about it? Well, we really don't know because, again, this isn't something that we specifically had asked for, so we're not quite sure about this. So it kind of stuck in my craw, so I began to do some research on it, and there should be a flyer coming out to your desks here from the pages shortly if it isn't already on its way out. So I've done some research to find out which financial institutions in the state of Minnesota this applies to. And there are actually 19 financial institutions that this applies to. State-chartered banks and state-chartered credit unions. And again, credit unions are those financial institutions that cater to lower and moderate income individuals. And so the first thing I did was I looked at the list and said, how many of these are in my district? And I found out that one of them was in my district proper. And I started looking, I said, well, how many are in Representative Dama's district? And she doesn't have any. And I started looking, well, let's get out to like Foley from central Minnesota area, and there's one where Representative Schultz is at. And I started looking, and it's like, well, Representative Perryman, she's also in our area, and she has two of them on the list. And something that I found that was just amazing, and it just blew me away when I was looking at this, that 25% of the institutions that are on this list are in Representative Wolgamont's district. And I was wondering if Representative Wolgamont would yield to a question, Madam Speaker.
Representative O'Driscoll, just a reminder that our remarks are about the substance of the amendment and not individual personalities. He will yield. Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Wolgamont, my question to you is, do you feel that we should be working with our folks in the central Minnesota area on trying to find a way to increase this number, to put them at a more competitive rate with those that are at the federal mandate on here?
Representative Wolgamont.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative O'Driscoll, I have to admit I was responding to a text message from a constituent about something else during your previous remarks. So if you could perhaps repeat the context of the question that you were asking, I'll be sure to give you my full attention and be able to give you an honest answer, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Representative O'Driscoll.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Vogelbach, this is a legitimate question because you and I attended a lot of the same chamber meetings where a lot of the folks are experiencing the same kinds of issues and same kinds of stresses. And I'm just thinking that if we spend less money on reports that the Commerce Department didn't ask for, that perhaps the folks at the credit union, the customers, the members is what they really are, and the customers of banks could get a higher rate of return on their savings or checking accounts and their certificates of deposit or a lower rate on their loans. And Representative Vogelbach, I won't ask you any more questions, but I just was very curious when I saw 25% of those institutions do business in your district out of the 19 that are here. It's not a get you, got you. It's just like, wow, we try to work together as a team in Central Minnesota, so I didn't have a chance to talk to you about it, so I just thought I would ask the question here today on the floor. And I concur with Representative Farr that we should have a green vote, and he did ask for a roll call if I'm not mistaken, so thank you, Madam Speaker.
Any further discussion on the Farr amendment? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on, Representative Farr.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So just to some clarification here. So this amendment is about parity in the industry. That's what it's about. We heard this this winter in stakeholder meeting. You know, we don't know what this looks like yet. There's no definition of this. We don't know what we're asking of our financial institutions or what we're going to do with that information when we do gather it. So again, we should not pass laws that devalue our state charters, because that's what I fear will happen here. We continue to hear how nationally chartered institutions are changing over to state chartered institutions, and I think that's good for the state and good for the Department of Commerce. And I wouldn't want to discourage that trend by singling out a handful of financial institutions. So with that, I ask for a green vote.
Representative Farr has concluded. Any other discussion? The clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 59 ayes and 69 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
O'Driscoll moves to amend Senate File Number 2744, the unofficial engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A6.
Representative O'Driscoll to the A6 amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. The A6 amendment deals with a provision in the bill that terminates the insurance company's ability to be able to do underwriting for Medicare supplements. If you recall back at the time that the ACA was adopted, that similar type of action was taken, and we know what happened to insurance premiums in the individual market. They skyrocketed. I mean, they went up so much that Minnesota instituted a national leading reinsurance program to be able to try to deal with those premium costs here in the state of Minnesota. What my fear is just that we're going to instill fear into the hearts and minds of retired persons who are trying to purchase these Medicare supplements. On the surface, it looks good, no underwriting. But when you get the price tag on that, just as we have seen, when you start pulling the guardrails out, the costs are going to catch up and the market eventually does find equilibrium. The last thing that I want to see is a senior tsunami surrounding this issue of the Medicare ACA equivalents. And so, members, I strongly encourage you to support preservation of the market by allowing underwriting in a market that's generally working very well, and a market that is generally working to provide the benefits that are needed to support and supplement parts A and B of the Medicare program in our country. And not only that, if we want to try to help folks, let's offer them a tax deduction for the premiums that they pay on those Medicare premiums. Let's be leaders in the state of Minnesota on that front in providing tax relief. So members, I ask for a roll call and a yes vote on the A6 amendment.
Representative O'Driscoll requests a roll call. Do I see 15 hands? Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Discussion on the amendment. Representative Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask members to vote no on this amendment. Senior citizens, just like everybody else, deserve to be able to get medication even if they have a pre-existing condition. That is a value that Minnesotans hold. We are going to protect people with pre-existing conditions, and the way to do that today is by voting no on this amendment.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Elkins? No? He doesn't have to vote. Fine. The clerk will close the roll. There being 59 ayes and 68 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Scott moves to amend Senate File Number 2744, the unofficial engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A7.
The member from Anoka, Representative Scott, to your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank the bill author of this genetic privacy piece. She did a lot of hard work on this bill and took many of our suggestions, was really good to work with. The one thing that we couldn't come to agreement on was the complete definition of what genetic data means. Now, if you look at page 174 and 175 of the bill, you'll see that genetic data means any data, regardless of the data's format, that concerns a consumer's genetic characteristics. Genetic data includes, but is not limited to, raw sequence data that results from sequencing a consumer's complete extracted DNA or portion of the extracted data. Then there are several other items that are included in the definition of genetic data. And my concern is that I don't really understand how you truly de-identify someone's genetic data. And so what my amendment does is says that genetic data does include de-identified data. We all know that when we voluntarily pay to have our genetic data looked at through one of these companies, that there are a lot of choices that a consumer has to consider. And the industry is doing a good job, a relatively good job, of offering some of these things and having individual boxes to check. Yes, you agree to have your data shared for this. No, you don't agree to have your data shared for that. But there's no choice when it comes to your so-called de-identified data. It can be used for multiple reasons, and you cannot opt out of that. And members, I think that it's really important, again, because it's super difficult to de-identify genetic data. It can always be traced back to you in some way or one of your relatives and then find its way back to you. So members, I would ask for your support on this amendment. It's just, adding that a simple fix, adding that de-identified data is part of the definition of your genetic data. I ask for member support. Thank you.
The member from Washington, Representative Hemmingson Yeager.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Scott. I've really appreciated all of our discussions. I've really appreciated, being a newbie, having your insight, and having the time and the interest in talking to a newbie like me. So very much appreciate that too. So this is a very narrow scope when it comes to genetic data. This focuses specifically on the direct-to-consumer genetic testing market. And Representative Scott has it absolutely right. These are people who are willingly giving up their genetic data to population databases so that they can learn more about their ancestry, about their health, or about any other traits they may have an interest in. So when we talk about genetic data, we need to talk about it in that context, which is why in the bill it specifically defines genetic data, and it specifically defines de-identified data. And I have gone making sure to talk to many people about this because in my academic brain, having a master's in genetics, yes, you could argue that any type of DNA is considered genetic data because it's attributable to one person. But we need to remember, this is in the context of direct-to-consumer genetic testing. So genetic data is data that is only attributable to the consumer. The process by which your genetic data would get de-identified is if you would want to participate in research. There are federal laws, there's agreements between different universities, there's a lot of regulations on how that information is used, how it's encrypted, the firewalls and the security measures that go in between that to make sure that there is no data breach. So those are all in place. And in these consent, you need to opt in. You need to say, yes, you may use my data for research, and then it would go down the de-identified path. So I'm happy to talk a little bit more about this, but I would respectfully request a no vote on this amendment because we want to make sure that we are not closing down a specific part of the market for people for which they want to partake. So thank you.
Representative Scott.
Members, I just encourage a green vote. Our genetic specialist here even admitted that it's super hard to de-identify. In fact, you almost can't. It's unique to you. So you can have your genetic data. They can say it's de-identified. It's thrown into this big database. Your name's not associated with it, but it's your DNA and it's your health information. So it would not be hard to find you and pick you out of all of that. So members, I encourage a green vote. Thank you.
All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. No. The motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
New Brindley moves to amend Senate File number 2744, the unofficial engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A16.
The member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley, to your amendment.
Madam Speaker and members, so the underlying bill includes a provision that creates a pharmaceutical drug or prescription drug affordability board. And while the intent of this is noble, the goal of the board would be to lower the costs of prescription medications, something that all of us agree with, something that we all think is a good idea. The problem, though, is that the solution that we have created with this prescription drug affordability board, it oversimplifies a very complex issue. While we're trying to address the cost of medications, that is good and noble, the prescription drug, the PDAB, the affordability board, focuses mainly on provider billing. And the reality is there are lots of different players in this supply chain, and we tried to ask questions about this in committee, but there weren't any real answers. But we've got PBMs, we've got the manufacturers. There are lots of people in this supply chain, but this is narrowly focused. And what I would point out is that in New Hampshire, they implemented a PDAB, and what they have found is that manufacturer prices have indeed been going down. That is a good thing, that is positive. The problem is the overall price to consumers, so to the end user of those medications, has been going up. And I think we want to avoid that. So what the A16 amendment does is it says that when we implement this, we're going to study it. And if we find that the cost of medications has not resulted in this reduction of prescription drug prices, then we're going to repeal the PDAB. We're going to get rid of it if it is not actually solving the problem that we are trying to solve. And members, I would ask for a yes vote on the amendment.
Representative Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative New Brindley. I certainly agree that we want to be effective here, and I certainly agree that if something isn't working, we should look at a different course. I don't think that this is quite the way to do this. I think that we should take strong action now, and we can continue to have conversations about it in the future. I am confident that this will reduce costs for consumers. I am confident that consumers need this. I think that the Prescription Drug Affordability Board is ideally suited to step between the monopolistic power of big pharmaceutical companies and consumers who need their products to live. And so I would like us to vote down the amendment today, among other reasons, I think by writing in that if prescription drug costs don't go down by some measure, it gives the players in the system an incentive to work against PDAB and actually increase prices to defeat the measure and trigger the repealer. So I don't support the amendment. I'd ask for a no vote.
Discussion. The member from Hennepin, Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative New Brindley. This is a good amendment. You know, it's not just New Hampshire that has done this, members. It's been done in 7 states, and there's nothing innovative about this approach. This is a piece of model legislation that is trying to get to the heart of the issue of lowering cost to consumers. The problem that has been happening, and honestly across the states, any state that has done it, well, I'll just look at Maryland. You know, Maryland, they set up and there's only 3 of the 7 that have actually attached an upper payment limit to their bills. They're the only 3 states out of the 7 that have combined those 2. So in Maryland, basically, it has to have the approval of the legislature before a change can actually come into place. In Colorado, that board reports to the legislature. They make those recommendations, and then the legislature actually has a decision whether or not it's gonna happen. And in Washington, they've limited it to 12 drugs a year. But let's look at what they all do. They look at list price. So we can basically put a cap on list price, and that's fine. And I'll just use an example of a $400 list price drug. And what's not being taken into account in this bill is the rebates. And the rebates are an important component to driving down cost of drugs to consumers. And let's say that our $400 drug has a 65% rebate, which is pretty common, and leaves a net price of $140. If you've got a copay of 25%, your cost is $100. The plan pays $40. All right, so if this bill also includes the elimination of copays and any kind of cost sharing. So now all of a sudden we're a little bit unbalanced because now we're gonna eliminate the copays, cost sharing. We're not taking into account the rebates, which are that's a driving factor in lowering drug costs. And there's actually nothing in the bill where there's a direct nexus between capping a list price and ensuring that a consumer pays a lower cost. So this is a really good amendment. It gives this body 5 years to actually get in there and let's see what they can do. And if they ultimately don't succeed, and I really appreciate Representative Stevenson for bringing it, but if they don't succeed, then let's make some changes. And let's put it in law that we're going to make those changes. So with that, Madam Speaker, thank you. Thank you, Representative New Brindley, for bringing this.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for the discussion. And thank you, Representative Nadeau, particularly for your comments. You are exactly spot on with what has happened in other states. And I just want to address a couple of things before we go to the vote. And first, Madam Speaker, I'd like to request a roll call.
Representative New Brindley requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative New Brindley.
So I just want to address two things quickly. One, we were told that we are confident that this will reduce the cost to the consumer. The problem is that hasn't happened. This is already happening in other states, and we have direct evidence to the contrary. The opposite has been happening. So I don't know what makes us confident that it's going to be different here. And also this idea that there's this incentive for drug companies to increase prices. Well, the PDAB gets to set the upper limit. Drug prices can't do that because the PDAB is going to set that upper price limit, and they don't get to increase the costs. So these are absolutely false narratives. And frankly, I'm saying let's give it a shot. Let's give this 5 years. Let's see if it reduces the costs, because every single one of us wants that. So let's try this out. Let's see if it reduces costs. But if it doesn't, if this is not saving consumers money, if it is, as it has done in New Hampshire, if it costs consumers more money, then we should eliminate this. And I would ask for a yes vote on the amendment.
Discussion. Any further discussion? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 59 ayes and 68 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
New Brindley moves to amend Senate File number 2744, the unofficial engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A17.
Representative New Brindley, to your amendments.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And on the A17 amendment, this one is just a little bit different than the A16 amendment. The A16 amendment was addressing cost concerns of this new PDAB. The A17 amendment addresses access concerns. And the A17 amendment would require the state to study what this is going to look like, particularly for access to prescription drugs in Minnesota, and it's going to delay implementation until we have the results of that study. And I want to point to a couple of things. Each of you should have a couple of letters at your desk that I had passed around. One is from a group of different organizations who are interested in ensuring that we retain access. It includes groups like the ALS Association, the Community Liver Alliance, International Cancer Advocacy Network, etc. There are quite a few organizations included in that, and I believe another letter is coming specifically from the ALS Association. So just last year in this body, we passed $20 million funding for research specifically for ALS. One of very, very unique. It was the only funding of its kind across the country. No other state has ever done this to fund ALS. And to be clear, ALS has been significantly underfunded because it is relatively rare, although it's interesting now that we hear about it a little bit more often, we hear that people have it, right? But it's relatively rare, and therefore it doesn't get the attention that a lot of other illnesses, chronic diseases get. And so it doesn't have a lot of funding. And the concern is that this PDAB I'm going to run through a couple of concerns, but one is that it will disincentivize pharmaceutical companies from investing in research and development. Let me look through my notes here. That one's on a different issue. The concern is that with these upper payment limits, we are disincentivizing pharmaceutical companies from bringing new medications to market. And as you probably know, certainly at the time my husband was living with ALS, there was literally one medication on the market for ALS, and on average, it increased lifespan a year, maybe. It was relatively minimal. But let me tell you, when you're a 40-year-old guy and you've got kids who are 5, 7, 9, 11, and 13 years old, that 1 year is a big deal. It's a very big deal. And these medications are very expensive. They're very expensive. The flip side of that, not only are these medications expensive, because of that, there are no parameters in the PDAP language for the Prescription Drug Affordability Board. It doesn't give specific parameters on how to make these determinations. And I apologize, if I had had this information and language earlier, I would have had an amendment on it. So I'm going to speak to it because it does apply to the A17 underlying amendment. But I was not aware of this, and frankly, it scares me. Again, this is from the ALS Association. I handed this out. I sort of underlined some things that I think are really important in this. But other states are using something called quality adjusted life year, or similar metrics. They are literally using metrics that determine the value of someone's life when they determine whether or not a cost is worth it. And of course, there are certainly legal ramifications with this, I think, particularly with the ADA. It is absolutely discriminatory. But I want to say, I'm going to read directly from this letter. It says, when applied to healthcare decision-making, the results can mean that people with disabilities and chronic illnesses, including older adults, are deemed not worth the cost to treat. Life expectancy for people with ALS, on average, is 2 to 5 years. My late husband, he lived 3 years, but the last year of his life, he was on a ventilator. So without that ventilator, he probably would have passed away in about 2 years. Fortunately, we were able to get the medical care that he needed when he needed it to extend his life. But this next statement just about kills me. It says, when analysts have applied QALY to a person with ALS, their score reflects a number less than 0, or a state worse than death. That's how bureaucrats have deemed the quality of life for a person living with ALS. Let me tell you about my husband's life with ALS. Even for that last year, while he was on a ventilator, and his care was very expensive, and his medications were very expensive. I mean, I think everyone has heard me say that he was on many different medications, and just one of them, it was actually a nebulizer treatment he took, cost us $600 a month. It's not cheap, I get that. But let me tell you about his life for those 3 years that he lived with ALS, and particularly his last year of life when he was on a ventilator. In fact, I should have passed out some pictures. one of the things he did, we're big board game family, we're big nerds, whatever. And there is an online website where they take traditional board games, but they put them online. And so his best friend is a dentist, and on Aiden's lunch break, almost every day, Aiden would be playing board games with John online. And he would control that. I would put the mouse under his hand. He couldn't move the mouse around, but he had just enough movement in his right hand to click. That's all he could do. He couldn't move it, but he could click. But he could make movement with his eyes on his eye tracking computer. So he could move the mouse around and play the game with his eyes and then click the mouse when he needed to click that mouse. And in fact, at his funeral, Aiden spoke at his funeral, and the website, of course, tracks how many times, how many games you have played. And Aiden listed the statistics and all the games that they had played on this website during John's illness. Another thing in our family, we're a big movie family. We set up a theater in our basement, and it's something that we've always really enjoyed. And I've got tons of pictures. My husband wasn't able to access our basement where our movie theater was, and so we would all pile in. We had a room set up on our main level with 2 twin beds, one for my husband and one for me. John, of course, had his hospital bed, and I was next to him in my own twin bed. And we would have 5 kids pile into these 2 twin beds for movie night. And of course, the coveted spot in the room was John's wheelchair, because of course it was a fancy wheelchair that lifted up and down and reclined and did all these things. So that was sort of the coveted spot, was John's wheelchair. My 2 youngest daughters, who were 8 and 10 years old when John passed away, their job was foot massages. My older kids had more serious jobs, frankly. My teenage boys were the ones who helped transfer. They helped with real things. My son Jack, he actually became an expert in suctioning his lungs out with the ventilator. My daughter, who was just 12 when John passed away, she actually became an expert at that as well. So certainly they were involved in those kinds of things. But my 2 youngest daughters, their job was rubbing Dad's feet. And just about every day, he would get a foot massage from his 2 youngest daughters. I assure you that his life was not a state worse than death. I assure you that that's the case. And I also assure you that while Riluzole, well, that was the only medication on the market, and there's not much more now, it added an average 6 to 12 months to a life. But again, when your life expectancy is 2 to 3 years, you're 40 years old. My husband was 40 years old when he was diagnosed with ALS. 40 years old, 2 to 5 year life expectancy, that 6 to 12 months is a big deal. It's a really big deal. And even when my husband had no movement, he was effectively paralyzed. Like I said, he could click that little finger, that was about it. We would have to scratch any itches. We would have to turn his head if he wanted to look somewhere. I assure you that his life was not a state worse than death. And I'm really concerned about the implications of a prescription drug affordability board that is going to disincentivize pharmaceutical manufacturers from bringing those drugs to market. And again, I, of course, have very personal experience with ALS, so I've shared that story. But it doesn't just apply to this relatively rare ALS. This is cancer treatments. This is liver treatments. It's all kinds of things that when they first come to market, they're just expensive. They are. And we should consider that. We should ensure, before we move forward with this, we should make dang sure that we are not going to create a situation where we are decreasing access to these really important medications for the people we love and for all of Minnesota. And I would request a roll call, Madam Speaker, and a
Representative
yes
New
vote.
Brindley requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Discussion. Representative Stevenson.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative New Brindley. And I'm not, and we often say at the beginning of these little speeches that we make back and forth, thank you. And I really, not that I don't always mean it, but I really mean it in this case. Thank you for bringing that perspective. I appreciate it. I think it's a really important perspective to share with the chamber. And I'm grateful that you're willing to do it. I know that talking about that experience is probably not an easy thing to do. So thank you for that. I do want to assure the chamber that the bill does not include anything like quality adjusted life year, a term that we were just discussing. That's not in the bill. It's not contemplated by the bill. That's not where the bill is going. Frankly, if we had an amendment today to preclude the use of something like quality adjusted life year, I would take it. And I'm willing to work with you, Representative New Brindley, in conference to try and come up with some language to exclude that. That's not the point of the PDAP. And if you look at Section 35, Subdivision 2, it spells out what the Prescription Drug Affordability Board can consider in setting these limits. And none of the things that are listed there are anywhere close to that. It's always focused on price, not is it, worth it or the quality of care, anything like that. It's focused on the affordability, the cost, the price. And again, we can work on incorporating something like that. I think I heard Representative New Brindley say that this had been implemented in other states, and this is a unique Minnesota model of a PDAB. Each state is doing this a little differently. I think ours is the best. I think ours is the strongest, but it is different than other states. And one way, to return to something that Representative New Brindley said on the last amendment, referencing New Hampshire. Ours is very different from New Hampshire's. New Hampshire's only includes state legislators, and they only deal with state and local contracts. So it's much more narrowly focused, and they have yet to issue any price limits in New Hampshire. They've yet to act in New Hampshire, which is perhaps why it's not really fair to say that New Hampshire has increased costs, because they haven't actually had a chance to do anything yet. Ours is a specifically Minnesotan model. It does not include the QALY issue, and again, we can work on that in conference. But the reason why I'm going to ask for a no vote on this amendment today was actually the first thing that Representative New Brindley said in describing this amendment. She said, and I wrote it down, that it would delay implementation until there's a study. And members, I don't want to delay implementation. Minnesotans can't wait. Their drugs are bankrupting them now. They're rationing their drugs now. They need relief now. We can't delay implementation, so I will ask for a no vote.
Further discussion. The member from Stearns, Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Representative New Brindley, you never cease to amaze me. You are a fighter. We see that from you constantly on the floor. And when you share your stories about your late husband, John, and not lose it, that's just utterly amazing. And what you are fighting for today with your amendment is not only the legacy and memory of your late husband, John, but for all the other Johns. Well, that didn't sound right. All the other Johns out there, I'm sorry, that was not my intended reference on that, but nonetheless, it's out there and it's on the public record. But I think folks know what I mean when I say that. For all the other folks who bump up against the things that you share with us. And you don't do it all the time about your family. And it's got to be terribly difficult to do that. So thank you for opening up yourself and your family and your situation to us. And I encourage a yes, a dark green yes and red vote, or excuse me, green vote on, see, I'm still mixed up in your story here, Representative New Brindley. a solid green vote on the New Brindley amendment. Members, thank you.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I couldn't tell a story like that, so thank you. This is another good amendment, members. Getting this right has consequences. And we always know there's negative consequences to when government sets prices. And we have already an example. You know, the feds, through the Inflation Reduction Act, have basically said, they've gone out there and they've adopted this, and it's started to set price controls. University of Chicago economists, not this side of the aisle, you know, economists. They've basically come out and they said that everyone agrees that price controls will decrease the number of new drugs. The debate is about how many. They estimate that just the Inflation Reduction Act is going to reduce research and development spending by up to 60% from 2021 to 2039, resulting in up to 342 fewer new drugs. So this is not just some simple thing about, you know, one person's story. This has consequences. And I just don't think we should move into it this quickly. I think this is, you know, Representative New Brindley's amendment is spot on, members. So please vote green. Thank you.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Chair Stevenson, thank you for that. And I hope that even if you choose not to take this amendment today, I hope maybe we can consider in conference explicitly excluding such metrics to ensure that those things don't happen here in Minnesota. But I want to say, even this idea that the board is focused on price, that's exactly the problem. And Representative Nadeau just pointed out exactly what the problem is when we focus on price. When we are determining the upper payment limit for these pharmaceutical companies, they're not doing the R&D. They're not bringing the medications to market. And again, that was a University of Chicago economist. It's not exactly a conservative think tank. That is the problem. And the problem is then that we are going to see fewer and fewer medications come to market for the most rare illnesses that are affecting Minnesotans. There are other diseases for which there's lots of funding, frankly. There's lots of resources poured into them. But we've actually had a lot of discussions in this chamber about rare diseases. We've got a rare disease council. We care about that. And as legislators, we care about that because it is very easy for people with rare diseases to become the forgotten people. It is very easy to deem the rare disease people less important than the people who are affected by things that, frankly, we see often. And there are lots of resources for. Like, there's a reason that we care about these things, and we need to care about it here. I do believe the answer is, and I would suggest that there are other states that are doing this. It is worth delaying. It is worth understanding what happens in those states before we make the mistake here. And I would just add this information that I offered about New Hampshire, about the manufacturer's prices coming down, but the cost to consumers going up. Again, that is not information from a conservative think tank. That is from their PDAB chairman, Gary Merchant. He is the chairman of the Prescription Drug Affordability Board. He is the chairman of the board in New Hampshire. He is the one who is telling us that manufacturer costs are coming down, prices are coming down, but costs to consumers are going up. And we have to understand that. Let's not make a mistake with this. It is too important. Please vote yes on the amendment.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 59 ayes and 69 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Doubt moves to amend Senate File Number 2744, the unofficial engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A14.
The member from Isanti, Representative Doubt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. This is an important amendment that will address or continue to provide stability in our individual insurance marketplace. Obviously, you probably remember in the past, this has been an issue with the instability in the individual insurance marketplace caused by the ACA and its implementation here in the state of Minnesota. Rates skyrocketed, people left the marketplace, some people went without insurance. Right now we're in a very stable place where the individual insurance marketplace has provided real reductions of at least 36% in premiums to folks that are purchasing their insurance there, and it is funded now based on the actions of the last legislature, and I think there's enough money in it to fund it likely for a full 5 years. The underlying bill, and I'm not necessarily the fault of the bill author, but he received a target for a negative, I forget the number, $236 million or something like that, which means, in budgeting speak here at the legislature, it means that he was told to take that money from the reinsurance program, from the premium insurance fund or whatever it's called, and take that out and transfer it back to the general fund to use for other things in the budget process. That provides instability for those people that are in that marketplace, and essentially it will end that insurance at least 2 years early for the folks that are in that insurance marketplace, which will directly increase rates for those people at least 36% and maybe more. So this amendment calls for a study to study the benefits of that reinsurance program, which has become a model for other states across the country that have implemented it successfully. I think there's probably, is the number 13 or 14 other states, something like that, that have done this and done it successfully, and it's been a successful model. We kind of led the way here in Minnesota. So I think it's something we should be proud of, and we should leave that money there to provide that stability. So I would ask for members to support. This amendment does two things. It says that we'll do the study, and then based on the results of that study, it will delay the transfer out of that premium insurance account or premium security account to the general fund, which will leave the money there for those people to use if the study shows that it's warranted. So I would ask for your support on the amendment.
There is an amendment to the amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
Stevenson moves to amend the Doubt amendment to Senate File Number 2744, the unofficial engrossment as amended. The amendment to the amendment is coded A18.
Representative Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Doubt. As Representative Doubt just said, there's two components to this, a study and then a delay or cancellation of a transfer. We can't do the delay in the transfer. That would throw the bill out of balance and make us in violation of the target, but I am thinking the study is a good idea. So what this amendment does is it eliminates the second part of the bill, the effective date portion, but keeps the study. It would be my intention that once we adopt this amendment, that I would recommend a yes vote on the underlying amendment.
Representative Doubt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I would ask members to vote against this, and just so you know what you're doing, voting for this will transfer the money out of that premium security account. It will end the reinsurance program effectively, throwing those people into instability and raising their rates by 36%. So that's what this vote means, and I'd request a roll call vote.
Representative Doubt requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Further discussion on the Stevenson amendment to the Doubt amendment. Seeing none, all those in, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. We are voting on the Stevenson amendment to the Doubt amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 69 ayes and 59 nays, the motion prevails. The amendment to the amendment is adopted. We are now on the underlying doubt amendment. Representative Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask members to vote yes on the amendment.
Representative Doubt.
Members, thank you and appreciate that support of this half of the amendment, Representative or Chair. This study is important. It will undoubtedly show the benefit to Minnesotans and the stability that this has brought to the individual marketplace, and it will undoubtedly show that this has been a successful program and that we should continue to fund this program to keep these rates stable. So I would ask for member support, and a roll call is not needed with the both sides agreeing to it. Thank you.
All those in favor of the doubt amendment as amended, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
O'Driscoll moves to amend Senate File Number 2744, the unofficial engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A3.
The member from Stearns, Representative O'Driscoll, to your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. The A3 amendment deals with a provision that is in this bill that directly affects anyone who owns a home or anyone who rents property from a housing provider. And the provision is having to do with the kind of insurance that you would have. That's called liability insurance. And liability insurance is when someone comes to your place, your home, whether you rent that property or whether you own that property, and they become injured. And it protects you, the homeowner, or you, the tenant, when you invite guests and others that come to your property. And insurance companies take great care as they go through and do evaluation of risk. And one of the things that has been a staple since the beginning of time is risk management. And one of the areas that the insurance companies attempt to manage risk, keep your premiums, my premiums on homeowners insurance lower, or renters insurance, is vicious animals. And what they do is they collect data and information on animals, and they find out, are you more likely to be bitten by a goldfish than a dog? Are you more likely to be scratched by a cat or a coyote? Are you more likely to have a timber wolf as a pet? And if so, what are the consequences of that? And as you start looking at the different types of pets, you get into some aggressive breeds of dogs. And folks like to have those breeds of dogs. But the problem is, because of the vicious nature of these dogs, the likelihood of a loss or a claim, a liability claim being paid, goes up. So the grandma who has the lap dog, the little poodle at her apartment to keep her, with some company and things, might be at a nursing home, might be one of the facilities that we have and have talked about, nursing homes and assisted living facilities. The likelihood that that animal is going to be vicious is pretty slim. But that grandma would end up paying more in renter's insurance or homeowner's insurance because someone had one of these vicious animals. The provision in the bill says, insurance companies, you can't rate accordingly on that. Let me say that again. Everybody who owns a home and has a pet is going to have to pay more for insurance premiums because we can't go ahead and actually account for the losses that are associated with these vicious animals. Since we started this session, there have been 2 instances that have occurred here in the state of Minnesota involving pit bulls. This is one of those aggressive breeds that I'm talking about. There was a 82-year-old person who lived up in Brooklyn Center who was mauled to death by 4 pit bulls. 82-year-old person mauled to death by pit bulls, an aggressive animal. Recently, there was a 21-year-old who was taking care of his brother's pit bulls, and those pit bulls turned on the 21-year-old. The disposition of these animals is unpredictable. Quite honestly, I don't care if you own those animals. Just don't ask everybody else to pay for the liability insurance for you to have those animals. Just like people who have traffic violations tend to pay more for insurance than those who don't have traffic violations, because of the thing called risk. So, ladies and gentlemen, members, I would like a roll call vote on this.
Representative O'Driscoll requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative O'Driscoll.
And strongly encourage a green vote. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Discussion on the O'Driscoll amendment. Representative Ryer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative O'Driscoll. Before I talk about some of the statements from Representative O'Driscoll's comments, I'd like to just talk about why it's important that we do pursue the removal of dog breed as a barrier to insurance. It harms consumers first and foremost. It is a barrier to people who are uninformed. They buy their homeowners insurance, homeowners only. This does not cover rental insurance. They buy it and aren't aware that they may end up underinsured because they simply don't know the fine print of the dog breed restriction. And then, to me, more importantly, is the fact that this has been associated with racial disparities and structural inequities in the housing market. The banning of breeds is aligned with the old practice of redlining. It's a modern form of that. And it's not something that we can continue to allow. It goes against our values as a community and as a society. Now, in Minnesota, we don't allow this at the municipal level, but we need to clean up our statutes to make sure there's no holdover from this era. Next, the use of breed lists is not backed up by actuarial science. There's no reliable actuarial data that supports making a distinction between breeds. In the bill language, there's an exception for dog breed restrictions that are based on sound underwriting and demonstrated actuarial principles, should those be put in place. We also have exceptions in the bill for dogs that are considered dangerous or potentially dangerous as defined by existing statute. We are just requiring insurance companies to focus more on the individual dog and their past behavior than on a breed. I mean, there's no doubt that when we have incidences like the one recently, or the two recently in Minnesota, that these are tragic. And I think everyone's heart in this room goes out to the family and all the people involved. But we do need to use evidence and data and patterns to craft and frame sound legislation that supports everyone in our communities. Now, there are a lot of organizations that have positions on breed-specific language. The American Bar Association, the U.S. Postal Service, who focuses more on prevention than breed discrimination. The language in this bill was agreed to by the Insurance Federation. State Farm does not use breed-specific barriers. So I would argue that there are many, many good reasons to vote no on this amendment. Thank you.
Discussion. Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I would tell you that my experience in the insurance industry and my work over the years on these matters tell me something quite different than what we just heard. I will tell you that, as I said in committee, the interesting part about dogs is they only bite once. Did you know that? Now, those in the committee know that because I shared this story with them. Dogs only bite once. Or the insurance company pays, because as soon as your dog bites, they cancel you. And as a part of the risk management process, when you sit down with an agent, the agent will run through a list of questions with you. How much personal property do you have? Do you have jewelry? Do you have? And then they'll get into what kind of animals do you have? Do you have exotic animals? And they use that to underwrite you, to determine what your premiums are going to be. Members, a yes vote on this amendment to strip this language out is a way to keep homeowners and renters insurance in the state of Minnesota, because it is not a mandatory coverage. Auto insurance is. When you buy auto insurance, when you buy a vehicle, you must carry auto insurance in order to drive down the road. When you buy a home, you are not required to have homeowners insurance. Your lender may require you to have it. You can't get a loan. Your landlord or your housing provider may require that you have renter's insurance, but the law doesn't. So as insurance companies, risk goes up and they're unable to account for that, companies will file to leave the state of Minnesota, leaving fewer options and higher premiums. And I can almost hear it in the minds of some people in this chamber going, there goes another Republican trying to scare people about what's going to happen in insurance. All we have to do is look back to what happened to health insurance in the state of Minnesota. We went to the ACA. When the rules changed, it's a math problem. And the math has to work out or you have a bigger problem. Members, a green vote moves to preserve premiums for everyone. A red vote moves us toward higher premiums and the removal of insurance options here in the state of Minnesota. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Any further discussion on the O'Driscoll amendment? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 57 ayes and 69 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Doubt moves to amend Senate File Number 2744, the unofficial engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A13.
Representative Doubt, to your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Excuse me. This A13, is that right? Yeah, A13 amendment deletes out a section of the bill called the in the bill called the Family Protection Act. We have referred to it around the legislature for quite a few years as the boat bill. And this is something that just unfortunately the language in the bill just doesn't work. You know, I actually was a supporter of this provision when it first came out, and because the stories are kind of heart-wrenching, right? And you see that and you think, boy, somebody should be able to be compensated for that. But when you talk to folks about it and you think about the actual details of the actual legislation, you realize the large amount of problems that there are with this language. So what the language in the bill would do is it would allow a family member, so if you've got a boat and you have insurance, liability insurance on that boat, you are driving the boat and one of your family members is injured in that boat, it allows them to sue you to get access to that liability insurance coverage, which really creates some problems. Basically what you end up with is you end up with one spouse suing another or children suing a parent, and I'll walk through why and what some of the problems are with that. Number one, the problem is you've got mandated insurance coverage on insurance that is not mandated in the state of Minnesota, and that's what makes this different than automobile insurance. We do not mandate boat coverage in the state of Minnesota. And actually, I think under this bill, you would actually see less insured boaters in the state of Minnesota, which would provide more liability for someone who is injured with no insurance policy to go after. It really leaves Minnesotans in a tough situation, and I don't think we want to create that scenario in the state. So what this bill does is it creates a moral hazard. It creates an incentive for one party to sue another when there is a shared financial future between those two parties. And you know, liability insurance really requires somewhat of an adversarial relationship between two parties. When you have two parties related to each other who share a financial future, if the insurance company is representing me and defending me, and my spouse, who I share a financial future with, is suing me, there's a great incentive for me to participate with my spouse and start testifying kind of in a way that's against the insurance company, which would create insurance fraud and a very high potential for insurance fraud in the state. So there's a reason that this isn't done anywhere. No other state does this. There's a reason that this isn't done in the insurance industry at all. It really creates a high potential for fraud, and frankly, we don't want that in the state. I do know that the bill author understands that there are some problems with this bill. After it left the Commerce Committee, which is where I heard the bill, in Ways and Means Committee, there was a provision added to this that says, basically puts a cap on any premium increases that can't exceed 15%. And there's a problem with that. First of all, there's an admission there that they know that this is going to create opportunities for a spouse to sue another spouse. It's going to create an opportunity for insurance fraud, where the two parties are kind of now working against the insurance company, and they both would benefit financially from that relationship. But what will happen is, because insurance coverage is not mandated in the state of Minnesota, if insurance companies are told that you cannot increase your premiums beyond 15%, but yet because of this bill, they have losses that exceed their ability for this insurance product to be profitable, they will stop offering insurance in the state of Minnesota. So we're basically telling insurance companies that we'd rather not have you offer insurance in the state of Minnesota, you know, and rather than allow you to recoup your costs to provide that insurance coverage. So, and having no insurance coverage in the state is very problematic. Again, we do not mandate boat coverage in the state. There is so if we have insurers that are leaving the marketplace and not offering boat insurance, you know, and you know, the land of 10,000 lakes, which actually I think we have more than 15,000 lakes in the state of Minnesota. This is the fabric of our summers here in the state of Minnesota. I mean, I don't have statistics in front of me on boat ownership and how many Minnesotans enjoy boat ownership and participate in that. But there is a place where if you're getting a loan when you're buying a new boat, the bank would require you to have insurance. And if we have an access problem to insurance and you can't buy insurance on a boat in the state of Minnesota because of this inability for an insurance company to recoup its costs or cover its losses because of this new provision, what we're going to end up with is nobody's going to be buying boats. And we have dozens of boat manufacturers and dozens of boat dealers in the state of Minnesota who are going to suffer a real economic consequence because people aren't going to be able to buy, actually they're not going to be able to even buy boats because they won't be able to buy insurance for their boat. And not to mention the fact that if this thing goes into place and insurance rates do go up, or if there's less insurance products available, it likely means we'll have less insured boats, because the only people required to have boat insurance on their boat are people that would be required by their lender. It means we'll have less insured boats on our lakes, which actually puts Minnesotans at risk, at a greater risk, if they are injured in an incident and they may not be able to recoup from that liability policy to cover their losses or their injuries in the event that there is an unforeseen accident. So this bill actually, I think, puts Minnesotans at greater risk. And just this language just does not work. And I know that the bill author is continuing to talk to folks from the insurance industry to try to find language that works, and I'm hoping we can get there. If this language does stay in this bill and goes into conference committee, I'm hoping, and I will offer to continue to work with the chair to find language that will work. And because certainly I think think we want to make sure that people are safe in their boats. And while we all know that boating accidents aren't common in the state, when they do happen, there can be serious injury and death. There is no question about that. So we just want to make sure that we don't set up a situation where we do have a potential or even an incentive for fraud against insurance companies and skyrocketing insurance rates and lack of availability of insurance in the marketplace, because ultimately we want Minnesotans to enjoy our lakes, we want them to enjoy our summers, we want them to be safe, and we want them to be protected. So with that, Madam Speaker, I'd request that members vote in favor of this, and I would request a roll call vote.
Representative Dow requests a roll call. Are there 15 hands? Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Dowd. And just for your curiosity, I got a text here. I can't totally vouch for the accuracy of this, but I'm told there are 830,073 registered boats in Minnesota, of which, if it's still true, I recall on the floor in 2019, former Representative Jerry Hertas said he owned 13 of them. So there are, you do the math there, less 13, that's everyone else's boats, and then Hertas has 13 of them. Members, the reason why you buy insurance is to protect the things that you care about. And what do we care about more than our own families? If you are buying boat insurance, you are going to presume, understandably, naturally, that this protects your family. And you would have every right to assume that, because the most frequent interaction, the most analogous interaction that you'd have with insurance industry is in auto insurance, which, as Representative Dowd said, is mandated, and boat insurance isn't. But it's important to understand that in auto insurance, we don't allow family exclusions. So consumers who buy boat insurance have every right and understanding to believe that their family members are covered. And then tragedy happens and they find out that they're not. That's what this provision is about. I do want to speak briefly to the moral hazard aspect of this that comes up, and the idea that this is going to promote insurance fraud, which I don't agree with. And I'll just note, and I've said this many times before, but this idea as a solution to insurance fraud is, and I saw Representative Niska stand up just a second ago, so he'll appreciate this, is under-inclusive and over-inclusive as a solution. Right? That's a lawyerly phrase. Over-inclusive and under-inclusive. What do I mean? I mean that it doesn't actually, it prohibits claims that are not fraudulent, and it doesn't prohibit claims that are fraudulent. Okay, so if I was going to commit insurance fraud, if I was going to commit insurance fraud, I would not do it with my wife. She would not be a willing participant in that scheme. She would sooner divorce me, and she would turn me in if she had knowledge. So very bad choice for me to try and commit insurance fraud with my wife. But my best friend, he would be totally up for it as long as I gave him a good share of the profits. Like he would be up for that, 100%. A family exclusion wouldn't stop me from committing insurance fraud with my best friend. It would with my wife, but again, divorce is a better remedy there. But for my best friend, you know what will stop me from committing insurance fraud? Prison. Because insurance fraud is illegal. That is the protection we have there. And it's a much better protection than a family exclusion. Members vote no.
Discussion on the Doubt Amendment. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. And Representative Stevenson or Chair Stevenson, I think you should maybe talk to O.J. Simpson's book agent. Maybe you have a sequel to his If I Did It book there. But members, I think it's very important that we're very clear about the types of insurance we're talking about here. We're not talking about medical insurance. We're not talking about no-fault insurance like the auto insurance we have here. We are talking about liability insurance. And so, yes, I think it is important that all Minnesotans understand that when you buy liability insurance, what you're buying is protection from your own liability. That when you are liable to somebody else, that you are buying protection for that liability. The way that insurance is accessed is by essentially litigation, either threatening a claim or actually filing a claim. And that coverage, those coverage issues are going to have to be resolved by trying to figure out disputed facts. A boat accident happens. Who knows exactly what happened other than the people who were there? and then maybe looking at some physical evidence that came after the fact. And so the real concern here isn't necessarily all of the out-and-out insurance fraud, although I think there is a potential for that. Representative Doubt makes good points about that. The problem is that the way that we resolve in our legal system disputed questions of fact is to have an adversarial process where different witnesses will testify about what they knew, and then we figure out what the answer is, or hopefully we're able to resolve that short of having a jury decide what the answer is. So the problem with this, and the reason Representative Dowd is completely correct that this kind of insurance really doesn't work in the liability insurance context, is that you don't really have an adversarial system when the parties on both sides of the V, so to speak, the plaintiff and the defendant, have a common interest. And the one who has the opposing interest, the insurance company, and frankly, all of the other policyholders who are paying into that insurance pool, they're kind of left on the wayside. And so I just wanted to add that perspective. I think Representative Dowd is completely correct that this is not a model of insurance that works in the liability insurance context. And we're talking about boat liability insurance. Having this type of claim that's recognized in the liability insurance context is going to really distort the adversarial process. It's going to distort the insurance markets, and Representative Dowd is absolutely correct. It is going to make boat insurance harder to get and more rare in our Minnesota lakes. Representative Dowd's amendment is a good amendment. Vote yes.
Further discussion. Representative Dowd.
Madam Speaker, and thank you to the chair and to Representative Niska for your comments. Just to wrap up on this particular amendment, I appreciate the input on the amendment. I'm told, and it doesn't surprise me, the 870,000 boats in the state of Minnesota. I'm told by folks that only 70% of boats right now are insured, and I think if we saw rates either increase or access to insurance decrease, I think you would see that number decrease. And I think what we want to do here in the legislature is try to promote more insurance on those boats and not less. Because if a boating accident does happen where somebody is at fault and it's too adversarial is a legal term. I don't mean adversarial, but two people who don't know each other in two separate boats, and one breaks the law and does something to injure somebody in the other boat, there should be coverage and there should be liability coverage that the person who is injured by no fault of their own has access to. The problem that we create here in the scenario that the chair mentioned, he mentioned his friend. Interestingly enough, he does not have a shared financial future with his friend. He does have a shared financial future with his wife. So if his wife is suing him, and I'm not suggesting that people are going to seek out or cause a boating accident in order to create fraud. What I'm suggesting is that a boating accident happens, one of your family members is injured on your boat, and now you're looking around saying, hey, somebody's lost a limb, why can't we get reimbursed for this or compensated for this on our liability policy on our insurance coverage? And so Minnesota law would require that the wife in this hypothetical scenario sues the husband and his insurance company. He was driving the boat when the accident happened. And now you've got those two in depositions and in court where these two people and the insurance company's star witness and the person who they're defending now has a shared financial future with the person who is suing him. And now that insurance company's witness might change their story a little bit to say, well, gosh, we didn't plan this accident. It wasn't insurance fraud in the sense that we intended to, lose a limb in a boating accident and, in exchange for some big payday, but it happened. And now, boy, if I just changed my testimony a little bit, my wife could get $1 million paycheck from my liability insurance company or whatever number. And because we have a shared financial future, I will benefit from that. And that's where the insurance fraud comes in. And that's why this isn't done in any other state. It shouldn't be done here. It doesn't work. And frankly, I think we're setting up a scenario, number one, where we're encouraging people to commit insurance fraud. Number two, we're increasing rates of boat insurance. And number three, we're potentially affecting or impacting access to boat insurance, which will reduce the number of insured boats on our lakes, which puts Minnesotans at risk. And for all of those three reasons, I ask you to vote against this, or for this amendment and against this provision in the underlying bill. So please vote green.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 58 ayes and 68 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Senate File 2744, third reading as amended.
Third reading as amended. Discussion on the bill. The member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members, and thank you to the other members of the Commerce Committee. It was fun to serve on this committee. Thanks, Chair Stevenson, Vice Chair Katiza-Watun, and Lito Driscoll, and our awesome staff, and all the other members who indulged my, kind of odd questions at times. I came onto the Commerce Committee as a first-year member. I thought that the point of the Commerce Committee was, to have some common sense consumer protection, but balancing that with the regulatory environment that we need to have a vibrant economy, especially in a tough time here in Minnesota. Instead, what I think we're seeing from this commerce bill is a bill that punishes pretty much every industry in Minnesota, other than, and I guess as a lawyer, I'm a little grateful for this personally, but it really punishes every industry in Minnesota other than the legal industry. It's really a pro-legal sector bill and an anti pretty much every other sector bill. It's a bill that's chock full of litigation traps for Minnesota businesses, new private rights of action, new Attorney General enforcement mechanisms, and I think this one wins the gold medal for unconstitutional provisions that will be challenged in court. Starting with the private rights of action, just a couple of examples. We have a new private right of action for increased price increases in generic drugs for consumer short-term loans. Again, these are going to be great for trial lawyers. I'm not sure they're going to be all that good for much of anyone else. But the worst provision in this bill on this front is a new free-floating provision that prohibits and creates new private cause of action and Attorney General enforcement for, quote, unfair and unconscionable acts and practices. And this is addressed in a couple of different places in this bill, but on page 173, lines 13 through 17, you can see that it creates a new cause of action for, quote, any method of competition, act, or practice that, one, offends public policy as established by the statutes, rules, or common law of Minnesota, two, is unethical, oppressive, or unscrupulous, or three, is substantially injurious to consumers. Now, if you're hoping that we define what any of those terms mean in the bill, you'll be disappointed. Instead, we're just creating vague, brand new, unnecessary legal traps and potentials for frivolous lawsuits where lawyers and then courts, potentially the Attorney General, decide what offends public policy or what is, quote, unethical, oppressive, or unscrupulous, or substantially injurious. Now, what we heard from the Attorney General's office, obviously they want more authority, but what we heard from the Attorney General's office is don't worry about those vague words because other states' legislatures have also passed really vague words, really, really broad words, and their courts have stepped in and limited them to something more reasonable. Well, I hope that's what Minnesota courts do if we pass this legislation, but that's not what we should be doing when we're legislating. We should be the ones defining what is unethical, oppressive, or unscrupulous, or what is substantially injurious to consumers. And we do that in a lot of other places in our statutes. If there are holes in those, we as the legislature should fix those holes. We shouldn't delegate our authority to the Attorney General, to private lawyers, and ultimately the courts. It also creates a number of provisions, a lot of work for the Attorney General's office. Again, the Attorney General gets to enforce that unfair and unconscionable acts and practices law. They get to enforce excessive price increases to generic drugs, the Digital Fair Repair Act, the automatic auto-dialing announcing devices statute, and the age-appropriate design code, among others. But third, I think that the way that this really hurts Minnesotans and helps the legal industry is it creates a bunch of new work for lawyers who are going to challenge this bill as unconstitutional, and creates a bunch of new work for the Attorney General's office to defend unconstitutional provisions. And I've talked about this, and I can't even remember how many bills that have come to the floor where I just continue to say the same thing. This is going to be challenged in federal court. Look at the case law. It's probably going to get struck down, and we rush ahead anyway. Like I said, though, this one probably wins the gold medal on that front, because there are at least 3 provisions that I think are likely to get struck down on constitutional challenges. The first is the generic drug price controls on pages 34 and 35, a prohibition where we, as the state of Minnesota, are clearly reaching out into transactions happening between a drug manufacturer and a drug wholesaler that outside of the state of Minnesota. It's very clear from the language of the prohibition, the language of the exception, that this prohibition only applies to drug sales happening outside of the state of Minnesota. The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals struck down an almost identical Maryland law on grounds, the core legal grounds that apply directly to the language in this bill, and Minnesota has had similar problems. For example, recent regulation of gold bullion, something that I was told there's some inside joke about the debate that happened on the House floor. That was before my time. In that federal constitutional claim, though, Maryland had to pay the attorney's fees for the drug industry, and I fear that Minnesota is going to have to do the same. So vote for this bill if you want money taken from our state treasury to pay the generic drug manufacturers to sue and win the lawsuit against the state of Minnesota. I don't want to do that. I don't think that's a good use of our taxpayer dollars, so I'm voting no. The digital fair repair language has a retroactivity provision that applies to equipment sold on or before July 1st, 2017. If you think that's a little odd and maybe applies retroactively to contracts that have already happened in the past, you're right. And that, unfortunately, is also probably going to be challenged on at least 3 constitutional grounds. There's a federal impairment of contracts clause, federal due process clause, and an ex post facto clause, and there are Minnesota constitutional provisions as well. Again, we're likely to get sued and probably lose. Third, the age-appropriate design code. Representative Stevenson referred to this, or Chair Stevenson referred to this as a new Minnesota model legislation. It's actually legislation that was passed first in California, and it's currently being sued and challenged on First Amendment grounds in California. But as I looked into this and researched it, I realized it's not actually even a California model. It's based on a model by an organization known as 5 Rights that promoted it. And as we're looking into this question and the constitutionality of it, I was wondering if Representative Bonner would yield for a question.
Representative Bonner will yield. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Bonner. I was wondering if you could help us, just to be on the same page, help us to understand where is 5 Rights based and who was it started by?
Representative Bonner.
Five Rights is an organization started in the UK. You may be aware that the age-appropriate design code is actually live in the UK right now. It is already been implemented and is being used successfully there. 5 Rights is an organization that has been looking to help bring better online and technical safety across the country. They do excellent work. And I want to be very clear to members on the floor today that the age-appropriate design code is about protecting our children online. Every single member in this chamber has probably heard from parents in their district that they are desperately looking for tools in order to keep their kids safe online. As a result of this legislation, what we've seen, Representative Niska, is that we've had large tech organizations who have already started making changes. TikTok announced that they would no longer allow strangers to send text messages to underage children. They've always had the ability to do that. But not until today, not until the threat of actually having to consider consumer protections for children, did they start to move that direction. YouTube decided that it might be best not to have addictive features anymore that allow children to do a continuous watching of various videos and suck them into that addictive behavior. We have folks who have decided that they have to, they will no longer be sending out ping notifications to children late in the evening. These are all positive changes that have actually started to occur already. And I'm really glad that you mentioned the First Amendment issue, because if you knew that, Representative Niska, then you obviously also know that that has been addressed in my version of the bill. I assume you read it and you know that there is nothing about this bill that pertains to content. First Amendment issues are based on content. This bill is a design bill. It's about asking companies to use a very common tool. I'm so glad, by the way, Representative Niska, you gave me the opportunity to talk about this bill. I really want to thank you for that, because this is such an amazing, amazing bill. And do you want to know why it's the best bill out there? Do you want to know why big tech is so afraid of this bill? Because it is literally the best bill out there. It is the smartest, it is the most targeted bill. And the reason it does that, Representative Niska, is it starts in the design phase, before the harm to your children can be done. As an IT professional, you probably also might know that I have over 20 plus years in IT experience, and I work specifically with software companies who develop online products and applications. That's literally what I do. So the brilliance of this bill is that it goes into the design phase and it says, let's take a look. We're going to ask companies to use a common tool that is used in marketplaces and in businesses everywhere across this country. It's called a risk assessment. It's not new. It's not novel. It says that we do this every day in other concerns. But it says that we want you to do this risk assessment and we want you to think about children first, not after the harm is done, not later. We want you to think about children first. And by the way, every industry in this country already does that. Whether it's car seats, whether it's cribs, or whether it's vehicles. Anywhere we know that children are likely to be in this country, we take protections. We take measures to make sure that children are safe. The internet has been given a pass. Technology has been given a pass for decades on this. Why should technology not have to follow the best interest of children? I ask you that, Niska, and I would ask you back, Representative Niska. Since you seem so concerned about rights, what about the data and privacy rights of children? Children under the age of 18. Do you know that these companies are actively targeting our children? They are collecting data on our children. They're using it to target them. They know the location of our children. They know where they live and work. Right? This is all wonderful. So, do we really want to have large tech surveilling our children? Do we want them to use that to target advertising to our children? Do we want them selling the data on our children? I'm pretty sure, Representative Niska, that if you went back and talked to the folks in your district, you will find that your parents are begging for some way in which to better address the issues for their children online to keep them safe. We wouldn't allow our children to talk to strangers in public. We shouldn't be allowing them to do things like that online either. This bill is about protecting the data and privacy of children. I have every confidence that this bill is the best of breed for that reason, because it does it in the right place. Not only does this bill do it in the right place, Representative Niska, but it also, as you do that risk assessment, it asks you to make certain mitigations that are appropriate to the level of risk. It also provides a 90-day right to cure, which means that businesses also have the opportunity to correct their mistakes, to do the right thing. It is the best approach for business. It is the best approach for Minnesota children. It is the best approach, period.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Representative Bonner, for that lengthy speech. I thought I was listening to the last president there talk about how everything he did was the best. But you're absolutely right that I hear from parents in my district. In fact, sometimes when I talk to myself, I'm hearing from parents in my district who are concerned about this problem. I am very concerned about this problem. That's why I signed on to a bill Representative Robbins introduced dealing with this. I'm not sure it's the perfect solution either, but I'm absolutely concerned about this. I have children from 17 to 11, 3 children who I am very much concerned about. But members, it was, I think, maybe 20 minutes ago when Representative Bonner actually answered the question that I asked. So let me remind you of what the answer to the question was, which is that this bill is actually model legislation from a UK nonprofit organization. She didn't actually say who started it, so I'll help her out with that. It's actually a British noble. So I'm absolutely concerned about this bill, or about this problem, Representative Bonner, but I don't think the right answer to this problem is by looking to a country that doesn't have a First Amendment. And you're right, it's already in force in the UK, but the UK doesn't have a First Amendment. They don't protect First Amendment rights. So we shouldn't do a British model. We shouldn't do the German model. We shouldn't do some other model. We should do the American. We should deal with this problem with an American model in the American way. And it is absolutely, your bill absolutely does deal with content regulation. There's no way to be age appropriate without dealing with content regulation. So we do have to make sure that we are very careful in how we deal with this problem in a way that is the American way, that protects our First Amendment rights, that protects all of our rights to free speech. This bill fails to do that, and frankly, this age-appropriate design code, and frankly, this overall bill fails to help with the economic problems that we have in this state. Our legal sector isn't the sector that needs a stimulus. Consumer protection certainly should be a priority, but the rest of our economy needs a balanced business environment to thrive. This bill misses the mark. It mostly creates more jobs for lawyers and invites other constitutional challenges. I love lawyers. I think lawyers are important, but lawyers aren't who needs, the legal sector isn't who needs a boost right now. It's the rest of the economy that needs a boost. This bill misses the mark. Vote no.
The member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Madam Speaker and members, I'm just going to touch on a few items in this Commerce bill that's before us this morning. And I'm wondering to start, is Representative Cagle on the floor? Would she yield for a question?
She will yield. Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to make sure I understand some of the changes to the bill. I certainly continue to have concerns about completely eliminating payday loans in Article 3, Section 6. But it looks like there have been changes made, and so you're preserving access to loans where that principal amount of the loan is over $1,300 without a minimum payment or credit advance. Am I understanding that correctly?
Representative Cagle.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative New, for the question. Yes, enabling access to safe and helpful credit options for subprime consumers is in Minnesota is a significant concern of mine, and which is why we've eliminated predatory payday lending loans, but also provided funding for nonprofits to attempt to fill at least some of that gap that may be left when payday loans are stopped. And so that's the reason, as you point out, that why we have the limited provisions in Section 6 codified in statutes in 47.601. So we just want to make sure that consumers have choices and options available that are not predatory. So thank you.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would Representative Cagle continue to yield?
She will. Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to be very clear. So you are preserving, maybe even just a head nod would do the job. You are preserving those loans where the principal amount is over $1,300 if it doesn't have a minimum payment or credit advance? Yes, okay, excellent. I just wanted to make sure I understood that correctly. So certainly, I appreciate that, and I appreciate that change. I still certainly have some concerns over the issue of removing options that, frankly, sometimes folks need. And while there are some alternatives in place, we could be putting people in a bad position who frankly, need access to their own money. It's their own money to pay their bills or whatever. So I do have some concerns about that. But quickly, I'd like to address some of the things that Representative Niska was hitting on with the age-appropriate design code. This is something that I am deeply concerned about. I am also a co-author on the Representative Robbins bill that was sort of getting at the same issue. I think that bill was, frankly, better and less complicated. And, you know, Representative Bonner was telling us about her credentials with IT. Certainly, I have no reason to believe that any of that is not true. I think all of us are well aware of that already. We've heard that quite a bit. But her legislating needs some work. Because the language in the legislation, well, she may have the IT experience, her legislation is severely lacking. And there are some real questions that need to be answered and dealt with in this underlying language. And frankly, we talked about California and the EU a little bit, both who have passed this, California is still dealing with litigation. But both of those entities, both California and the EU, have agencies who are tasked with overseeing consumer data and data privacy. Minnesota doesn't have that. We don't have that, and so we are putting a lot of onus on the AG without, frankly, you read the fiscal note, and there are a lot of things missing from that fiscal note that are not addressed. The cost of standing up a compliance operation, that's not free. There is a cost to that that's not addressed. It also doesn't address rulemaking. And the Attorney General's office, and in fact, in Representative Bonner's comments, she talked about how things are going to need to be adjusted. Well, the Attorney General's office doesn't have rulemaking in this language. This is a problem. I would also just say, draw your attention to the fact that, you know, businesses are required to respond to written requests from the Attorney General in either 3 businesses or 5 business days. I'm not sure why there's different numbers there. That's a little bit confusing to begin with. But it doesn't spell out a request to who? Who is responsible for this? I mean, we all know, frankly, all of us in this chamber have legislative assistants. We have assistants who typically go through our mail. They might monitor our email and make sure that important things are flagged for us, whatever. They answer our phones for us and let us know when we have important phone calls that we need to return, whatever it is. This just says that a written request by the Attorney General to the business. Well, who in the business? Who needs to respond? When does that 3 business days start? It's not clear. It's not defined. And the last thing I would highlight before moving on are the civil penalties. There's a $2,500 per affected child penalty for each negligent violation. And there is a $7,500 per affected child fine for each intentional violation. Well, how is that determined? And who is determining it? There are a lot of problems. Like I said, I get Representative Bonner might understand IT, but maybe her legislating could use some work. The last thing that I want to touch on is going back to the Prescription Drug Affordability Board. I hope that we have outlined the very real concerns with moving forward with this prematurely, which I absolutely believe we are doing. There is plenty of, there are, 7 states, I believe, that are working on implementing prescription drug affordabilities right now, boards right now. This is already happening elsewhere. Minnesota should wait and see the data on this. We should make sure, rather than just assuming, we can look at the other legislation that other states have done and just assume, oh, don't worry, we'll get it right. We'll be the state to get it right. We often think that. We think we're smarter than everybody else. Well, guess what? We're not. I wish I could say we were, but we're not. And so rather than moving forward and being one of the mix of making mistakes and fixing mistakes, it just does not make sense to do this when there are states in the middle of this. We are already getting data back. Like I said, when I talk about New Hampshire, that number is not made up, and that is not some conservative think tank that's giving us that data. It is the PDAB chairman, Gary Merchant. He is the one who has told us that manufacturers' prices have come down, but the cost to consumers, the people who need the medication, their costs are going up. I don't know why we would ignore that. And frankly, I feel like we were told that we should ignore that we don't really know what's happening in New Hampshire. Well, that's what the chairman of the PDAB believes is happening. And so we should absolutely take that seriously. And on the access question, you know, I actually, someone texted me and said, you are spot on when it comes to access. This is the problem. When we put these price limits, when we put these upper payment limits on these medications, it is not disputable. It's not debatable. It 100% disincentivizes research and development. It doesn't happen. And we've seen numbers that it stifles as much as 60% of research and development. And frankly, Minnesotans can't afford that. Minnesotans cannot afford the costs of this PDAB, whether that is in actual costs, when the cost of their medications going up for them, or whether the cost is less access to the medications we need. And because of that, this is an easy no vote. This commerce bill today that's before us is simply not ready for prime time. This commerce bill that is before us is experimenting, and Minnesotans are the subjects of that experiment. And I'm not doing that to my constituents. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Isanti, Representative Doubt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. You know, as we're closing out this bill here, just wanted to point out a couple of things that I think are problematic. They're things that I talked about and offered amendments on. Number one, and I think these are reasons, unfortunately, to ask you to vote against this bill. Number one is the Family Protection Act, or the boat bill language that's in the bill. As I mentioned during my comments on the amendment itself, this really is concerning and problematic for our insurance industry here in the state of Minnesota. And insurance, you know, I say it, that insurance industry, I don't mean to suggest that we want to favor corporations or anything like that. I just mean, you know, insurance is there to protect Minnesotans, and unfortunately I think that this language will result in less boats being insured and less insurance products and less affordable insurance products, and potentially less products being available to consumers in the marketplace, which ultimately results in less boats being insured in the state of Minnesota. And I think that's really problematic. I think that puts Minnesotans at risk. when there are unfortunate, and I know there's not a lot of them, but when there are boating accidents where there is an injury, we want to make sure that people are protected and they do have access to insurance products that will protect people in the event that they are in an accident, and provide the sort of coverage and reimbursement for injuries or the sorts of things that would be required. That's what we want. We want to make sure that our boats and our lakes are safe in the summertime here in Minnesota, and we want people to enjoy our lakes and our water sports here in the state of Minnesota. We want people to buy and purchase boats, and particularly boats that are manufactured here in Minnesota. This has been a long tradition, and we don't want anything to hinder that here in the state of Minnesota. But that language is just really very problematic, and I think will have negative results for both boat owners and potentially Minnesotans that are injured by somebody operating a boat that is not insured in the state of Minnesota. And we're at greater risk of that because of this language. So I would ask for that reason to vote against this bill. But I think the biggest issue that I have with this bill is around the reinsurance issue. And this is an issue that we've debated on the House floor many, many times. The jury is back on this issue. The results are in. The data is clear. Reinsurance has been an incredible success in the state of Minnesota. Unfortunately, Minnesotans were disaffected by the ACA, the Obamacare, when it was implemented here in Minnesota. And the reason for that is simple. We had better coverage and better insurance coverage than the rest of the country, than the average of the country when the ACA was passed. So what happened was, for those of us that did it better, our results here in Minnesota were actually lowered to the median or mean of the country, and so Minnesotans were disaffected by the ACA being implemented here. What I mean by that is much higher premiums. What I mean by that is much higher deductibles. And when we've been through this numerous times on the House floor, there were many families. In many cases, you were talking about a family of four for their medical insurance coverage or health insurance coverage. They were paying $3,000 a month and a $13,000 deductible for a family of four, and they had to pay that before they got one penny of coverage. And so what happened was Republicans stepped up and said, this is unacceptable for a family of four to pay out of pocket $40,000 before they had one dime of health insurance coverage in the state of Minnesota. That is not insurance. And while technically, Democrats were able to say that more Minnesotans were insured because of Obamacare in the state of Minnesota, we all know now that wasn't true. And the reason that wasn't true is, while they had insurance, their deductibles were $13,000 and their premiums were $3,000 a month. I'm sorry, that's not insurance. When you have to pay $40,000 out of pocket before you have one penny of coverage, that's not insurance. And we know that's the fact because what we saw, and somebody on the House floor yesterday referred to it as charity care, and I find that term to be offensive. We shouldn't use that. We should get that out of our vocabulary. The proper term would be uncompensated care. What we saw is that uncompensated care at hospitals in the state of Minnesota actually increased after the ACA was passed here in Minnesota. And the reason for that was simple. And I'll tell you, before I say that high uncompensated care or uncompensated care at hospitals, meaning hospitals that weren't being paid for their hospital bills that patients were racking up, uncompensated care was actually the reason that folks were saying we needed Obamacare or the ACA in Minnesota. But the reality was, uncompensated care actually went up after the ACA was passed and implemented here in Minnesota. And the reason was, people could, while they now had insurance, they couldn't afford their deductible. So their hospital bills weren't getting paid. And so we actually had a higher amount of uncompensated care after the ACA's implementation here. And that's how we know, the jury's in on this. ACA, Obamacare was a failure here in Minnesota. There's no question about that. Rates skyrocketed for those in the individual marketplace. Deductibles went from $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000 up to $13,000. And when you have a $13,000 deductible, you don't have insurance. And what we found is that many people left the marketplace and left insurance altogether. So what Republicans did is Republicans stepped up and said, how can we provide some stability to ever increasing insurance rates in the individual marketplace? And we put in place something similar to what we had before with our MCHA program, which is a reinsurance program. And that reinsurance program reduced rates in real money by 36% on average for Minnesotans. So premiums went down 36% for people that were buying insurance in the individual marketplace. Those were real results, not froze, not went down a little bit and then went back up. They went down 36%, period. End of story. Incredibly successful. And we were the first ones to implement that reinsurance program. We did it while I was, I'm supposed to say a line here to make somebody laugh, but they're not in the chamber, so I won't. When I was the speaker, we implemented this program, and it was incredibly successful. We led the country. We were the first ones to do this in the country. And it was incredibly successful, and it has been a model for other states, and I think 13 or 14 other states have done this now since we did it, and it has been incredibly successful. So the real problem with this bill is that this bill, and the bill author was given a target by leadership of like negative $230 million or something like that. I don't have the number right in front of me. But when we see a target on the budget targets like that, we know what's going on. And around here, we call that stealing money. So to make the numbers meet in all the other budget areas, the bill author was instructed to take 230, whatever the number is, $230 million out of the premium security account, transfer that to the general fund, and use that money for other things. So here's the real problem, members. We have a $17.5 billion surplus right now in the state of Minnesota. A $17.5 billion surplus. On top of that, the budget targets that Democrats have right now in the Minnesota House are increasing taxes by another $9.5 billion. So we have twice the highest surplus we've ever had in the state of Minnesota. And on top of that, now, somebody with any common sense would say, gosh, we've got this surplus that, equates to about 30% of our state's budget. We should expect some tax relief back. What a surplus means is you're collecting more money than you need to operate state government. So any level of common sense would tell you that what Minnesotans would expect is, well, we're going to get some of that money back. Now, maybe we'd get more money back if Republicans were in charge, but my gosh, even Democrats can see that this is too much money, and they're going to give some of it back, right? Half, 3/4, something like that. No. On top of spending the $17.5 billion, Democrats are raising taxes another $9.5 billion. For a total of $27 billion of new resources available. And that's why what's happening in this bill is a real crime. And when we say stealing money from an account, that's what's happening here. So the people who count on this money to keep their insurance rates stable and low are going to be thrown, into instability. They're going to, for sure, jury's back in on this. We already know. We've seen what happens. Democrats tried to do this 4 years ago, and we saw what happened. You will see a 36% increase in premiums in the individual marketplace. On top of that, you will see the kind of normal increase you might see from year to year. But at a minimum, you're going to see a 36% increase. If you buy insurance in the individual marketplace in the state of Minnesota, and there's about 150,000 Minnesotans that do that, you will see, because of this bill, you will see a 36% increase in your premiums. That is a fact. But what makes it a real crime is that they're taking that $236 or whatever million from this premium security account when they've already got $27 billion of new money to spend. I mean, this is the sort of thing that you should wear a mask and hold a gun when you're stealing that kind of money out of one of these accounts from people who need it. And who's impacted by that? Whose rates will go up 30%? The family farmers, a family of 4 that we remember from down in Winona, who are paying $13,000 deductible and more than $3,000 a month for their insurance. Those are the people that are going to see the increase. That small family farm. So those are the people that Democrats are stealing this money from. And when Minnesotans were told on the campaign trail this year, you should expect a tax cut. We're going to cut, seniors, we're going to stop taxing Social Security in the state of Minnesota. Well, we now know that was a lie. Democrats lied to Minnesotans about that. You know why? They can't say no to anybody. They need to spend that money. And not just that money, all of the other $27 billion, and on top of the $27 billion, because the $27 billion doesn't include this $230 million transfer out of the premium security account, and the $27 billion doesn't include all the fee increases that are hidden in all these other bills. And while Minnesota families are suffering and reeling from the highest inflation in a lifetime caused by failed Democrat policies, Democrats are doubling down and taking more money from Minnesotans. At a time when we have double the largest surplus in state history, Democrats are doubling down, and they're going to increase taxes $9.5 billion, which, by the way, equates to about a 10% increase in taxes across the board. That's what we're talking about, members. And in addition to that, they're going to steal money from those small family farms that can't afford health insurance because of the failed implementation of Obamacare here in Minnesota, which actually hurt Minnesotans. These are facts. This stuff's not open for debate. We have all the data. We've seen all the results. We've seen how much those premiums have gone up. And we've seen how much Minnesotans have been hurt. But Republicans are here, and while we're in the minority right now, we are mighty. And we're going to use our voices to make sure that Minnesotans know what Democrats are doing to them in this chamber, in this day. We're going to let Minnesotans know that Democrats are breaking their promises. We're going to let them know that Democrats are stealing their money and increasing their insurance rates. And we're going to let them know that at a time when they should expect a tax cut, which is what we would give them, Democrats are going to double down and increase their taxes 10%. So when you voted for Democrats, this is what you got, and we're going to make sure that people remember it. So I'm going to ask you, and this is your last chance, I'm going to try to let you, I'm going to save you from yourselves. When the board opens up, we should all vote against this bill. Not just for this reason, but for all of the reasons that my colleagues have pointed out. This is bad policy, it's bad fiscal policy, and it's broken promises. And you know what? It's absolutely typical of what Minnesotans can expect from Democrats. So while I'm disappointed, I'm not surprised. And I can't say we didn't tell you so. But just because we told you so once doesn't mean we're going to stop. We're going to make sure Minnesotans remember. So this is your last chance, Democrats. You got an opportunity to save yourselves. When this opens up, we can all vote no. We can send this back. We can get new targets. And we can stop stealing from Minnesotans who need that money, who are already reeling from your record high inflation. This is our opportunity to actually put our money where our mouths are, to actually give Minnesotans some of their money back, and to stop punishing them. But this is your last chance. So members, please vote red.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Howard.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just wanted to speak briefly on the important prescription drug affordability provisions in this bill. When we pass this bill, we will make Minnesota a leader in this country in the fight for affordable prescription drugs. Specifically, as members know, I've worked for years in the fight for affordable insulin. This bill will cap co-pays for Minnesotans with insurance for affordable insulin, for Minnesotans that need access to asthma inhalers, for Minnesotans that need access to EpiPens. In many ways, this closes the loop in important work that this legislature has done over many years to ensure that Minnesotans have access to life-necessary prescription drugs at an affordable price. In addition, I am so proud to be voting for the Prescription Drug Affordability Board and want to thank Chair Stevenson for his work on this. I've talked to so many Minnesotans over these last few years that are just crushed under the weight of prescription drugs, that are faced with choices of, am I going to pay for my drugs or buy groceries? And they don't know where to turn. We have a complicated healthcare system, and Minnesotans are left throwing their hands up in the air. But the Prescription Drug Affordability Board in this bill is the answer to that equation and helps tilt the scales back towards Minnesotans. And I have to say, I'm struck always by the general arguments we hear from the other side on prescription drugs, which seems to be that, we've got this very complicated healthcare system. And by the way, it's complicated by design, by big pharma and the big money interests that are reaping billions in profits by it. But because it's so complicated, we can't risk rocking the boat. And members, we should reject that. We are not going to wave the white flag to big pharma and agree that it's okay. It's not okay. And this bill says that it's time to tilt the scales back towards Minnesotans to give access to every Minnesotan that needs it to affordable prescription drugs. If you want to make Minnesota a leader in a fight that is important to every community across the state, vote yes for this bill. Vote yes to make prescription drugs more affordable to all Minnesotans. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Stearns, Representative O'Driscoll.
Well, thank you, members, for the discussion this afternoon, and I want to thank all of my colleagues on the Republican and Democrat side for the civil discourse that we've had today. Chair Stevenson, I want to underscore what you started with. You and I have, through the pandemic and this year now that we're back face-to-face, have found a way to, although have adversarial positions, find a way to be able to make time for both to be fairly heard, and so I do appreciate that. As I look at this bill and as I look at the conversation today, I'm going to boil it down to 4 things that I think every Minnesotan can identify with. I see the headline in the statewide papers, not tomorrow morning, maybe not 3 weeks from now, maybe 2 or 3 years from now. Bites and boats raise insurance premiums. Bites and boats raise insurance premiums. And we start getting to the paragraphs, the journalist who writes that's going to talk about Minnesota legislature changed the laws and said that insurance companies can't underwrite for dangerous dogs, causing premiums to go up. Second paragraph, although not covered under boat liability, Minnesota legislature, led by Democrats, has expanded coverage where coverage didn't exist in their policies. Could have been purchased in a separate policy, still available in the state of Minnesota, but was told it was too high, so we have to modify the current policies to wedge coverage in where premiums are not being collected. Premiums are going up because both homeowners policy companies and boat insurance policies are leaving. And I sure hope for your sake, Democrats, on this one, that it doesn't come out on the fishing opener weekend and when people are towing those boats up to the lake and up to the cabins, because that's going to be a really difficult conversation to have with your constituents if they see that. As I look around this chamber, Republicans are on their devices right now. Don't worry, so are Democrats on their devices right now. But the difference between Republicans being on their devices right now and Democrats being on their devices right now, as the Republicans offered an opportunity for those very important devices, because if they weren't, everybody would be stopping what they're doing right now and listening to me. But I'm smart enough to know you're not. And it's not because of the message, it's because you need those devices. We need our devices to survive. And when Republicans offered an amendment to be able to establish a consumer bill of rights that when you go in and somebody says, yeah, I think I can repair that for you, what the consequences might be. Democrats said, well, we've been working on the right to repair for a number of years. Maybe next year we'll protect the consumer. But right now, we hope to be able to pass this. We know it needs some work, but we'll just hope that consumers don't get taken advantage of too badly on this when we could have had a chance to do a Consumer Bill of Rights. And the fourth and final thing that really disturbs me about this, as we have seen and as Representative Dowd has underscored, the ACA has raised havoc with the insurance market, the health insurance market. And Minnesota said, you know what, we're going to double down. We're going to remove underwriting from Medicare premiums, and we're going to scare the daylights out of our seniors who are on Medicare that they're not going to have coverage because they can't afford it. And what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to probably come back as Minnesotans with this crisis that was self-inflicted and self-created and create a reinsurance program for the Medicare supplement market. There's a hole in the bucket, for those of you who are familiar with that song. We have a chance today, dear Liza, to fix that hole in the bucket. With what shall I fix it, dear Liza? With a no vote on the bill today. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Anoka, the author of the bill, Representative Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members. Started today by saying that, by thanking the members of the Commerce Committee for the good discussions and debates we had, and noted that we could be disagreeing on the policy without being too disagreeable, and I appreciated that. And I did appreciate that, but I think along with that, I have to acknowledge that I think we fell short of that on the floor today in one specific respect. I think that some of the comments that were directed towards Representative Bonner today went beyond the merits of the proposal that she advanced and into some personal comments about her, and I thought that was really unfortunate. I think we're better than that, and I hope that we will be better about that in the future. So I apologize to Representative Bonner for the way that debate unfolded. That's not what you deserved, even if people disagreed with your bill. Having said that, this is a good bill that I'm proud of, and I hope people will vote yes.
The clerk will take the roll on the bill. Will the clerk please call the name of the member who is voting remotely?
Richardson.
Richardson votes aye.
Richardson votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 70 ayes and 58 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to.